Adrian Cole had always believed that friendships arrived quietly, like rain beginning without warning. You didn't plan them, and you certainly didn't expect them to change your life. Yet the day Adrian first noticed Ethan Walker sitting alone in the corner of a small Portland cafe, something about the moment stayed with him longer than it should have. At the time, Adrian had only been living in the city for 3 weeks. The apartment he rented was small but comfortable, tucked above a bookstore that closed early each evening. Most days were quiet. He spent hours in front of his laptop designing logos and website layouts for clients he rarely met in person. Freelance work gave him freedom, but it also left long stretches of silence that sometimes felt heavier than he liked to admit. That silence had followed him to Portland. Adrian had left Chicago after a relationship that ended slowly and painfully. There hadn't been one dramatic argument or a sudden betrayal. Instead, the affection between him and his former partner had faded in small pieces until nothing meaningful remained. When it ended, Adrian packed his things, accepted a few new clients online, and moved west, hoping distance might reset something inside him. Portland, at least, felt calmer. The cafe near his apartment quickly became part of his routine. It was narrow, warm, and filled with the soft hum of conversation. Most afternoons Adrian would sit by the window with his laptop, sipping coffee while pretending to work more than he actually did. That was where Ethan appeared. Adrian noticed him because Ethan seemed comfortable in a way most strangers weren't. He walked in like he had been there 100 times before, greeting the barista with easy familiarity. He had dark hair, a relaxed smile, and the kind of confidence that made people instinctively look up when he entered a room. At first, their interactions were small. A nod of acknowledgement, a quick smile when they reached the counter at the same time, nothing important. But after a few days, Ethan sat at the table beside Adrian and glanced at the design sketch on his laptop. Graphic design? Ethan asked casually. Adrian looked up, slightly surprised someone had spoken to him. Yeah. Freelance work. Ethan nodded with interest. That explains the headphones and the intense focus. Adrian laughed quietly. I wasn't actually working that hard. That short exchange became the beginning of something neither of them planned. Over the next week, their conversations grew longer. Ethan had an easy way of talking that made everything feel natural. They spoke about books they liked, cities they had visited, and the strange feeling of starting over somewhere new. Ethan worked in marketing for a mid-sized company downtown. His job, he explained, involved campaigns, deadlines, and clients who often changed their minds halfway through projects. It sounds more exciting than it is, Ethan said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. Adrian smiled. That's exactly how I describe my job. The familiarity between them grew quickly. Soon Adrian found himself arriving at the cafe almost expecting Ethan to appear, and most days, he did. Their conversations became the best part of Adrian's routine. What started as casual small talk slowly turned into something deeper. Ethan was funny, thoughtful, and surprisingly open about things most people kept private, yet Adrian noticed something else too. Sometimes Ethan's voice carried a faint weight behind the humor. It first surfaced during a conversation about relationships. They had been talking about the difficulty of meeting genuine people when Ethan mentioned, almost absent-mindedly, my partner says the same thing. The word partner caught Adrian's attention immediately. Ethan didn't seem to notice the brief pause that followed. Marcus, Ethan added, stirring his coffee. We've been together a few years. Adrian nodded, keeping his expression neutral. That's a long time. Yeah, Ethan said softly, something in his tone felt unfinished, but Adrian didn't push further. Instead, he told himself what he already knew. Ethan was taken. The realization should have drawn a clear boundary. Yet their friendship continued to deepen anyway. Days turned into weeks. Sometimes they stayed at the cafe until evening. Other nights they walked along quiet streets nearby, continuing conversations that seemed to move effortlessly from one topic to the next. Adrian began noticing how often Ethan looked relieved when they met, as if those hours offered him a break from something heavier waiting elsewhere. One evening, while they sat outside watching the last light fade across the street, Ethan mentioned Marcus again. He's an architect, Ethan said. Works insane hours. Sounds stressful, Adrian replied. It is, Ethan admitted. He's good at what he does, though. There was pride in his voice, but also distance. Adrian sensed it without needing further explanation. What about you? Ethan asked suddenly. Any relationships back in Chicago? Adrian hesitated for a moment before answering. Nothing that survived the move. Ethan studied him for a second, as if understanding more than Adrian had said. Fresh starts can be strange, Ethan said quietly. Yeah, Adrian replied. They can. After that night, their connection shifted in subtle ways. Ethan started texting Adrian occasionally, simple messages about work, random jokes, or recommendations for movies. Adrian responded more eagerly than he intended. That he told himself it was harmless, just friendship, yet there were moments when the ease between them felt different, more personal, more complicated. One late evening, after the cafe had closed, they walked slowly through a quiet park nearby. The air was cool, and the city lights reflected faintly off the pavement. Ethan had been unusually quiet that night. Finally he spoke. You ever feel like someone understands you better than the person who's supposed to know you best? Adrian glanced at him. Sometimes. Ethan exhaled slowly. I think you understand me better than anyone lately, he said. The words landed heavier than Adrian expected. For a moment neither of them spoke. Adrian felt his pulse quicken, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Part of him knew exactly what Ethan meant, another part didn't want to admit it, because if that quiet friendship had already begun crossing an invisible line, Adrian wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. After that night in the park, Adrian Cole tried to convince himself that nothing significant had changed. Ethan Walker had simply shared a thought, a passing reflection about understanding and connection. Friends said things like that sometimes. At least, that was the explanation Adrian repeated to himself during the following days, yet the rhythm between them shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore. Ethan began messaging Adrian earlier in the mornings and later at night. The texts were simple at first, small observations about work, jokes about frustrating clients, or questions about how Adrian's latest design project was going. But the frequency slowly grew, and Adrian realized Ethan had started weaving himself into the quiet spaces of his day. Adrian would wake up to a message waiting on his phone. Sometimes it was a photograph of the sunrise from Ethan's office window, other times it was a brief line. Coffee later. Adrian always replied. The cafe where they had first met continued to serve as their meeting point. It had become familiar territory now, a place where their conversations unfolded naturally without effort. The barista greeted them like regulars, often placing their usual drinks on the counter before they even asked. Adrian noticed how easily Ethan relaxed when he sat down across from him. The tension that occasionally lingered in Ethan's expression seemed to dissolve during those conversations. One afternoon, while Adrian worked on a branding project, Ethan watched him sketch ideas across a tablet. You're lucky, Ethan said. Adrian glanced up. Lucky? You get to create things that are yours, Ethan explained. Your work ends up in the world with your name attached to it. Adrian shrugged. Clients still change everything at the last minute. Ethan laughed quietly. Still better than marketing meetings. Adrian studied him for a moment. Beneath the humor, he sensed a tiredness Ethan rarely acknowledged directly. Rough week? Adrian asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Just busy. The answer felt incomplete, but Adrian didn't press further. Their friendship had grown on honesty, yet both of them seemed careful about certain subjects. Marcus was one of those subjects. Ethan mentioned him occasionally, but always in passing. Adrian had pieced together only a few details. Marcus Hale was an architect, he worked long hours, and he and Ethan shared an apartment across the city. Beyond that, Ethan rarely spoke about their life together. Still, Adrian found himself thinking about Marcus more often than he wanted. The idea of him lingered like a quiet reminder that Ethan belonged to someone else. One evening, after the cafe closed earlier than usual, Ethan suggested they walk along the river nearby. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the cool air carried the distant hum of traffic. They moved slowly along the path, their conversation drifting from work frustrations to favorite travel memories. At one point Ethan grew unusually quiet. Adrian noticed the change immediately. You okay? Adrian asked. Ethan kept his gaze on the water for a moment before answering. Marcus and I barely see each other lately, he said. Adrian didn't respond right away. Instead, he listened. Ethan continued, his voice calm but thoughtful. His projects are getting bigger, which is great for him. But it means late nights, weekend meetings, all of that. That sounds exhausting, Adrian said carefully. It is, Ethan replied. For both of us, I think. There was no bitterness in his tone. If anything, Ethan sounded reflective, like someone trying to understand a complicated situation rather than blame it. Adrian wondered how long things had felt that way for Ethan. Do you talk about it? Adrian asked. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. But when someone's constantly working, conversations turn into quick updates instead of real discussions. They walked in silence for several steps. Adrian felt the weight of Ethan's words settle between them. Part of him wanted to offer reassurance, something supportive but neutral. Another part felt uneasy, aware that these kinds of conversations could lead somewhere neither of them should go, yet Ethan seemed relieved simply to speak about it. You know what's strange? Ethan said after a moment. What? I didn't realize how quiet things had become until I started spending time with you. Adrian slowed his step slightly. With me? Ethan nodded. You actually listen, he said. Not just waiting for your turn to talk. It's rare. Adrian wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments like that felt heavier in the context of Ethan's relationship. I think most people listen, Adrian said eventually. Ethan smiled faintly. Not the way you do. The words lingered between them as they continued walking. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened further. The conversations grew longer, the pauses more comfortable. Sometimes they sat in a cafe for hours discussing everything from childhood memories to the risks of chasing creative careers. Adrian learned that Ethan had once considered becoming a writer before choosing marketing instead. Ethan learned that Adrian preferred working late at night when the city was quiet and distractions disappeared. They began sharing parts of themselves that most acquaintances never reached, yet the unspoken reality remained. Marcus existed beyond the edges of every conversation point. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan suggested something different. Marcus is hosting a small dinner next week, he said casually while stirring his coffee. Just a few friends from work. Adrian looked up. You should come. The suggestion caught him off guard. Are you sure that's a good idea? Adrian asked. Why wouldn't it be? Adrian hesitated before answering. I don't know Marcus. That's exactly why you should meet him, Ethan replied. You're important to me, Adrian. I'd like the two of you to know each other. The sentence sounded simple, yet it carried more meaning than Ethan probably realized. Adrian felt a quiet tension form in his chest. Meeting Marcus would make everything real in a way their friendship had so far managed to avoid. Still, Adrian nodded slowly. All right, he said. Ethan's smile returned, warm and genuine. Good, he replied. As they left the cafe that evening, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was approaching. Until now, Ethan had existed in a space that belonged only to the two of them. Late conversations, quiet walks, shared understanding. But meeting Marcus meant stepping directly into Ethan's real life, and Adrian wasn't entirely sure what he would find waiting there.